Today I'm going to go way, way back to a land beyond the beyond and a time before the time beyond, back to the very year 1980. And I was moving to Hollywood in 1980. I'd had enough of university life at California Institute of the Arts, where I was in the composition school, and I had to explain every single note of music I wrote to anybody that I was talking to about writing music. Why did you do that? What's the reasoning behind this? What is your purpose in doing this? Well, my purpose is to write music, not to explain why I'm doing it. And while there was a lot of analysis and a lot of hand-wringing about exactly why music was being written, a lot of times I didn't have a reason to come up with for why I was writing the music, and I got extremely tired extremely quickly of having to constantly explain this to people, namely composition teachers. That is not to say that these composition teachers did not have a lot to offer, which I picked up on, and also visiting composers too had much to offer in the way of explaining how music worked and why they did things the way they did. But in my capacity then as a late teenager, 18, 19 years old, I had very little patience for soul searching as to why I was doing what I was doing. I just wanted to do it. So I ran out of patience for whatever reason and became a college dropout. One of many things that I've not completed in my life, and I do have some regrets about becoming a college dropout. However, if I would have continued to go to school there, I might have missed out on a lot of things, a couple of which I will explain right now. In the year 1980, I moved down to Hollywood, California. And Hollywood sounds very glamorous and everything, but in fact, it is not glamorous. It might be for a couple of people, and maybe it was more glamorous in the 1940s or 50s or maybe even the 60s, I'm not sure. But by the time 1980 rolled around, Hollywood was not glamorous. So that's where I went, and I knew some things about it, namely the music scene, which was pretty cool and interesting, highly diverse. So Hollywood, California is primarily a land of fantasy. This is where a lot of fantasy comes from, and equally a lot of fantasy has been projected upon the place, much of it from magazines and gossip columns and things like that. But Hollywood in the 1980s was certainly not glamorous. Piles and piles of drugs running through the place, probably the beginning of a kind of homeless thing. There was a Skid Row in Hollywood, and East Hollywood was pretty rough. West Hollywood not so much, but definitely there was a dark undercurrent in the place at the time. So I moved to Hollywood in 1980, and the day that I moved there is very much in my memory because it was election day in 1980. And this would have been the first term of Ronald Reagan. So there was a lot of anti-Reagan sentiment running through the punk community and the alt community of Los Angeles at the time. And so that was very noticeable. And the place that I moved into was a tiny studio apartment a few blocks east of Vine on a street called Lodi Place. And there was basically one big room. It wasn't even that big of a room, but it had a tiny cooking area. And then the only separate room was a bathroom. I had my bed in the front. I had a little desk, and that was it. And as I was moving in, I noticed that the television upstairs was blasting election results. And of course, this continued until about 4 o'clock in the morning. And these were my new neighbors. They were drunken older people who were kind of deaf and kept the TV up all the time. So that was my first day in glamorous Hollywood, USA. One of the reasons I picked Hollywood to move to was because it was right in more or less the epicenter of the music scene of Los Angeles. There was the Starwood, the Whiskey A Go-Go. There was a new place called, I think Club Lingerie was open by that point, but the guy that opened it was a guy who ran the first punk rock club in Los Angeles, which was called The Mask, which was a place I went to quite a bit when I went to Cal Arts. We would drive down to The Mask, see the Germs, the Go-Go's, the Alley Cats, Controllers, Screamers, all those famous Los Angeles bands played there. And I saw a lot of them. Many of them I think I probably saw maybe their first gigs or so. But I lived in close proximity to a place that opened up called the Cath de Grand. And Cath de Grand was a cool little club that was in the basement of, I don't know what it was. I think maybe it was some offices or something like that. After the offices closed, this place opened up. Every Monday night they had a band playing called Top Jimmy and the Rhythm Pigs, and they played R&B favorites. Top Jimmy was kind of a rapscallion type of individual, as everybody else in the band was. I was friends with a guitar player in the band for a little bit, a guy with the amazing name Carlos Guitarlos, and he became friends with Lori Black and I. Lori Black was my girlfriend at the time, and she came down to Hollywood for a little bit before she decided she didn't want to live there, and she moved back up to San Francisco, and then would come down later, maybe about a year later or something, at which point we lived together again. So more often than not, I would be at the Cath de Grand on a Monday night to see Top Jimmy and the Rhythm Pigs, and usually one or two local bands would open up for them. One of the bands being the Red Hot Chili Peppers, who were just a local band at the time, and they were getting a reputation for themselves playing pretty cool, interesting amalgamum of like punk and funk and rock and roll all mixed up together. They were super high energy and were really cool guys also. I got to know them sort of vaguely through a bunch of other people. A lot of other bands played down there too. Gun Club played there, the Germs would play there occasionally, the Alley Cats, and a bunch of other bands I can't remember at this point. After Club Lingerie opened up, maybe about a year or so after 1980, I went in there once and I saw a band playing called 1313. And this was a band that Lydia Lunch had, and she was basically using members of the Weirdos, another famous LA band, as her backing band. And the drummer in the band was a guy named Cliff Martinez. And he was a drummer for the kind of last version of the Weirdos, I think. Anyway, I saw the band 1313 playing, and I was playing with a few different people trying to put a band together at the time, doing some minor recording. And listening to the band, I was really struck by the drummer, who I thought was a really great drummer, and that was Cliff Martinez. And after 1313 set, I just walked up to him and I said, "You're a great player. Do you want to do some recording or some playing?" And he kind of went, "Oh, sure. What are you doing?" And I just explained to him how I'd been going to Cal Arts and had dropped out and was interested in just playing with some different people and stuff. And so, to my delight and surprise, Cliff said, "Sure, give me a call." So he gave me his number, and that's exactly what I did. I called him up maybe a week or so later. "Hey, what are you doing? I have a little practice place. Why don't you come down? Let's play together a little bit." And so he did exactly that. And I wrote a few songs and made a plan to do some recordings with Cliff. And meanwhile, Cliff played with the Weirdos still and was kind of playing with a variety of other people that I didn't necessarily know. He had also a band with another drummer and maybe a bass player, I think, that was called 2 balls and a bat. And they played really wacky avant-garde stuff. Cliff was kind of a fan of people like Max Roach, Captain Beefheart, a variety of really weird alternative sounding things. And so that made me like him even more. He was an educated player. So we ended up doing a little bit of playing and recording together, and that was pretty cool. Kept in contact with him. And I think at one point I even played a gig with the Red Hot Chili Peppers with a guy, a bass player and a drummer that I was playing with. Cliff didn't play on that show. So I remember them kind of going, oh, you guys are cool. What are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And I really wasn't doing anything. I was just trying to get more gigs and write more tunes and stuff like that. At that point, the Chili Peppers had a guitar player called Hillel Slovak in the band, and I think they'd maybe gone to high school together or something like that. But this was a pretty solid sounding band, and there were rumors around that the Chili Peppers were going to be looking at signing some kind of record deal or something, and a lot of bands were getting vacuumed up by record labels at the time who were trying to cash in on the new wave punk rock thing that was going on in Hollywood and LA. So bands were getting together, breaking up, getting signed, doing all this kind of stuff that was going on during this micro signing frenzy. The Weirdos broke up and Cliff was not playing with them anymore, and he ended up playing with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And so they went through a phase where they got rid of their guitar player, the original guitar player, Hillel, for drug-related reasons. There was a lot of drugs circulating through this particular community at the time. Everybody knew it. It was kind of an open secret, and nobody was trying to keep it a secret. Some people were doing more drugs than other people, and that became kind of known information also. Anyway, right when the Chili Peppers were talking about signing to, I think it was EMI or whatever, and Cliff was in the band, they let their guitar player go for reasons of drug usage, although other members of the band were using drugs too, but I guess Hillel was using a little more and became undependable as a player, and they were wanting to move in a different direction. So Cliff asked me, because he'd done a fair amount of playing with me at this point, if I'd be interested in auditioning for the Chili Peppers, and I kind of went, oh, this is interesting, and sure, I would love to do it. I knew those guys could play. I knew they were serious about playing. And I knew Cliff was a great player, so I thought this could potentially be a really interesting direction. They were already playing music that I was interested in. I was interested in Parliament Funkadelic. I was interested in James Brown. I was interested in some of the punk rock stuff they were liking. And they were absolutely getting after it as live players, so this would have been a cool thing to do. So when Cliff asked me if I was interested in auditioning, right away I was like, yeah, I'll do that. Okay, this would be a cool thing to do. What I didn't know was that at that specific time, the Chili Peppers were thinking about more or less breaking up. And Flea and Anthony had this kind of thing going on where they were not seeing eye to eye specifically about where they wanted the band to go, what kind of direction they were going to take, if they even wanted to do this major label thing. I think they were pretty serious about wanting to do it, but they were just having a major disagreement about doing it. And also, frankly, they were doing a lot of cocaine at the time. And so this wasn't creating a situation that dialogue was happening in, or any kind of unified idea as to where they were going to do or what they were going to do. So an audition was set up for me, And I knew they were auditioning other people too. I was just thinking, this is great. I could play, they could play. I thought, frankly, that it would be a good match. So, day of the audition comes up, and we agree to meet at their rehearsal place or whatever. And Cliff gets there a little bit early. I get there a little bit early. I'm just hanging out with him playing. And this is the days before cell phones. So we're there playing for about half an hour, 45 minutes after those guys are supposed to show up. Cliff goes and makes a phone call. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're supposed to do this. Okay. So Flea shows up. We play a little bit. I think we play the Hendrix song, Fire or whatever. He seems pretty anxious. He's like, yeah, this is great. This is cool. He's amped up about it or whatever. And he leaves. He's like, oh, Anthony's not here? Oh, okay. Well, I'm out of here. So once again, it's Cliff and I sitting there going, Cliff goes and makes another phone call. I think he manages to get a hold of Anthony this time, reminds him that an audition is supposed to be happening. So about half an hour goes by more, and Anthony shows up. Okay, let's do the song Fire by Jimi Hendrix. Okay, we're doing this song again. I've played through this song like about 4 times with Cliff, a couple of times with Flea. And now Anthony wants to do it. Okay, I'm pretty warmed up on this song by now. So we play the song. He's like, whoa, this is cool, man. I like this. I'm like, yeah, this is great. What do you want? What else do you want to do? I think there was 1 or 2 other songs in their set list that they'd been playing forever at this point, maybe a year or so. So I think Cliff had given me a cassette. I knew the songs. We went through those. Anthony really liked it. Awesome. Yeah, this is cool. Okay, we'll be in touch. Walks out the door. And then kind of in passing goes, where's Flea? Oh, he was here. He took off. Oh, okay. All right. And that was the end of that. And Cliff just kind of laughed about it and was like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. That's what's going on. So that was the end of my big audition with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Cliff said, well, I guess somebody will call you. You know, I'll be in touch, whatever. And I thought to myself, yep, probably not. And on a side note, a friend of mine who had gone to CalArts had moved down to LA and kind of became sort of a cocaine dealer. And so I knew I'd known him for a few years at this point and would talk to him regularly. And I called him up and he said, oh, what have you been doing? And I would play with him occasionally. He was a guitar player and also great artist. And I told him about the Chili Pepper audition and he just started laughing and he goes, yeah, those guys. He said, yeah, I think I've pretty much cut those guys off. And I go, what do you mean, from like selling to them? And he goes, yeah. He goes, got to a point a couple of weeks ago where I woke up about 8 o'clock in the morning and it just sounded like there were monkeys in my yard. And I went, monkeys in your yard? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, and I looked out the window and there was Flea and Anthony and a couple of other guys literally swinging from the trees, making monkey sounds. And I went, yeah. And he goes, yeah, they were kind of living it up and were on a binge. And this had gone on for basically a day and a half. And I thought to myself, yeah, I think I'm going to take a break here. And so in my mind, I went, yeah, okay, I got dropped in the middle of this kind of thing that was going off the rails. And so it went completely off the rails for me because I was not called back. And frankly, I don't even know if they remembered that they had an audition with me. Obviously, they did not. But Cliff stayed in the band, went on to do copious tours with them, played on their second album also. Freaky Styley, the George Clinton produced one. And they got a guy in the band called Jack Sherman, who played on both of those records, and then he was gone, and then I think they got John in the band. So that was my little experience with them. And while Cliff was still in the band, after I'd moved to San Francisco, they'd come up there and play. And Cliff would sometimes stay at our house. Lori and I would go to the Chili Pepper shows. They'd be in Berkeley or wherever. And they were really fun to go to. And I think they kind of cleaned up their act a little bit, and then eventually really cleaned it up and became the Chili Peppers that everybody knows and loves today. So that was my brush with fame with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and firmly filed in the file of a what if situation. So that's that. If you like the content here, you can buy me a coffee. You can visit my Bandcamp page. And you can also visit my Patreon page, which is currently being restructured. However, there's a ton of unreleased and interesting material. And I'm also writing about my record collection, writing about everything from Bjork to Bach. So you might find some of that interesting. Please remember to subscribe and like because it helps the channel grow.